What's down, people, and welcome back to another episode of Ghetto Gospel. So where we left off at. Last week, we talked about the Abraham, Sarah, and King Bima love triangle that almost happened until God stepped in and had something to say about it. We also talked about how when God come through for us in a jam, it's a good idea to at least give him some credit for it and not just act like it's a given or he ain't have nothing to do with it. The last thing we talked about was how even though Abraham wasn't no punk, it's some battles that's just too big to fight on your own. And now we caught up. So this the chapter we've been waiting on. Well, this the part Abraham been waiting on. He finally getting that son that God promised him. Ain't no way this could possibly go wrong. So the first thing it says is that the Lord came to Sarah just like he said he would and kept his promise to her. In the original language, it's really just saying that God took care of Sarah like he said he would. So don't read more into that than what's actually there. Then it say that Sarah got pregnant and gave Abraham a son at his big old age and at the exact time that God said he would. And they named him Isaac. And obviously, they circumcised him at 8 days old, just like God told him to back in chapter 17. So Abraham finally got a son with Sarah at 100 years old. And Sarah was like, God, you funny, and anybody who hear about this gonna laugh about it. Who would have thought that she'd give Abraham a son at they big old age? But here he is. And everybody lived happily ever after, right? You see all of this here between these fingers? This the stuff that ain't happened yet. So after Isaac got off that breast milk and was old enough to eat real food, Abraham threw a big old party. And I don't know what Isaac was doing at the party, but Ishmael, his older brother, stepbrother, but still brother, was making fun of him, or laughing at him, or joking with him, or playing with him. I ain't super clear on what interpretation of the word they meant right there, because they could all fit the context. Remember that episode? Anyway, all of them interpretations of the word sound like normal stuff that an older brother might do to or with his little brother. And that word that a lot of Bibles translate as mocking in verse 9, that's the same word they used for when Sarah was laughing about having a baby at this age back in verse 7. It's also the same word they used for when Abraham laughed at God back in chapter 17. Regardless, whatever he was doing, Sarah felt some kind of way about it. So obviously, she approached the whole situation real calm and rational like. Nah, that ain't what happened. Homegirl went off telling Abraham to get rid of that slave and her son because he ain't gonna inherit none of our stuff. It's all going to Isaac. And the next verse say that Abraham was distressed about it. But the way that word was getting used in this part of the Bible almost make it sound like Abraham felt like Sarah was asking him to do something that was evil. Now I gotta pause right here. Imagine you Abraham. This your son. You love him. You done raised him for 14 years, teaching him the family business, how to be a man, thinking about and imagining what his life gonna be like when he grow up. And now your wife having a fit, telling you to send him and his mama packing. And back then, it wasn't like now where there was homeless shelters and churches with soup kitchens and whatnot. Not only did you have to grind for and kill your food, but it wasn't no law enforcement back then like what we got right now. That might not be a bad thing. But the point is, you could get snatched up and made a slave by whoever had the muscle to do it. Hagar was already a slave. This wasn't new information to her. And Sarah was telling Abraham to kick her out into the wilderness where there wasn't no guarantee of food and water. And it was wild animals, and worse, wild people roaming around. And I bet Abraham was figuring that God was gonna tell him not to kick that boy and his mama out. And God didn't. When I said that, I just got what felt like a taste of what Abraham must have felt. God told him not to stress about Hagar and Ishmael and to do whatever Sarah said because Abraham's bloodline was going to be traced through Isaac. And I guess to make Abraham feel better about the whole thing, God told him he was going to make a nation out of Ishmael too because he was also Abraham's son. That's tough. God's supposed to be holy and all that. How he gonna just let Sarah get away with telling Abraham to kick out Hagar and Ishmael? On one hand, I feel like that's a question I ain't never gonna fully get the answer to. But when I was trying to figure it out and digging into what the words mean, I discovered something. Them words that Sarah said in verse 12 is the last time you see her say anything in the Bible. Literally, the next time you see her name come up is when it tell you she died. So the next morning, Abraham got up, made him some bread and some water for the trip, and sent him packing. And so they wandered in the wilderness until he ran out of water. And then it said that Hagar put Ishmael up under one of the bushes because she ain't want to have to watch him die. And then she sat down a little ways away from her son and bust out crying. Not no cute Hollywood save the makeup crying. I'm talking about
How come he don't want me, man?
What? I ain't crying. You crying. And I bet Ishmael was probably thinking the same thing Will was in that episode. So then they say that God heard Ishmael crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven. Like, what's wrong with mama? Don't trip. God didn't heard your boy crying. Get up and help him up, and I'm gonna make him a great nation. And when she got up, God showed her a well where she could get some water and give her boy some water. And then they say that God was with Ishmael, and he grew up, settled in the wilderness, and became an archer. Wasn't none of these back then, so you know he had to be nice with that angel. And his mama got him a wife from Egypt, which, if you ain't never seen what Egyptian women look like, go ahead and Google it, unless you married, and stay off of Google. The point is, your boy did all right, and we ain't even got to the promises that God made about him. Which make me wonder, if God wouldn't have let Sarah kick him out, how things would have turned out. She already hated Hagar, and once she had her own son, she wasn't too much feeling Ishmael either. That's just my opinion, so God don't do nothing by accident. So I bet a hot sausage po' boy that Ishmael was better off because God separated him from Isaac. Plus, I bet that boy had a chip on his shoulder like,
It became personal with me.
So right about here, the story take a whole turn and start talking about something else, which, as far as I could tell, ain't directly connected to what just happened, but I'm gonna throw it in here anyway so we can finish out the chapter. So in verse 22, it start talking about King Bima from the episode last week, and how him and the commander of his army, remember what I said last week about kings and armies? Came to holler at Abraham, and King Bima was like, man, God, in everything you do, I'm gonna need you to swear on God that you ain't never gonna break no agreement you make with me or my descendants. You know I've been loyal to you. I'm gonna need you to be loyal to me and to this here country where you are alien at. That's alien like, y'all remember. So that sound kind of shady, right? Almost like he's saying, this country took you in, I'm gonna need you to treat us right. But it's a couple of things to take from that. First, King Bima apparently speaks for the whole country. The other thing is this, God taking good enough care of Abraham that King Bima can already see that if he don't stay on good terms with Abraham, it's gonna be a problem in a few years. So he trying to stop that problem before it ever happened. And so Abraham was just like, on God. But then he was like, you know, a couple of your people stole a well from me. Now, if y'all wondering why this whole thing about wells keep coming up, wells was how folks got water back then. I don't know for sure what the Middle East looked like back then, but this is what most of it look like right now. Yeah, water kind of important. And from everything I done read, it seemed like it didn't always been that way. So then King Bima was like, what you talking about? I ain't even know it. You ain't say nothing until today. So Abraham gave that man a bunch of flocks, and then he separated 7 lambs about the flocks. And King Bima was like, what's so special about them 7? And Abraham was like, take these 7 lambs as proof that I dug this well. So as far as I could tell, it seemed like back then, whenever folks wanted to put a rubber stamp on a covenant or a promise between 2 people, y'all remember the episode about covenants? Somebody would give up something valuable. Like you couldn't just make a promise, it had to cost you something. Maybe we ought to bring that back. And so everybody started calling that part of the country by the promise that they made. And Abraham planted a tree there and called out to God, which at this point, it seemed like he'd do that every time something good happened to him. And then it say he lived there as an alien in the land of the Philistines for a good long while. Remember that name, Philistines. They gonna come up a lot as we get deeper into the book. So that's it for this week. Any links from this video is gonna be in the description down there. I'll see y'all next week, and as always, peace, and I hope y'all people straight.